Wait, wait, I'm changing the size of my phone so it's readable. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Currently, the condition of developing nations, especially Indonesia, in corruption rate is very concerning. They are ranked 102 in transparency level in all over the world. We think that these numbers will continuously drop because we never take actions to solve the corruption rate in our countries. Therefore, as the opening government, we will propose to forbid parties with high rate of corruption cases to join general elections. And how does our mechanisms look like? This look like 5 points. Number one, we will ban the party from elections and getting to politics entirely. This means that they cannot send their political representations to the elections at all. Secondly, is that we will set numbers on the standard of like what rate that the parties itself cannot enter the election itself. Thirdly, we will try to strengthen the KPK itself, try to make them have more independency in doing their research, and we will make independent KPK bodies to ensure that there is no further corruption cases that take place in Indonesia. And lastly, we will make taste evaluation to all political political figures in every sometimes. So we will do this gradually and ensure that that the corruption rate cases will be updated every sometimes, right? We think that you have to characterize the politics in developing nations, especially Indonesia. Number one, there is a tendency of political dynasty that is very, very strong and make them able to do abuse of power, such as corruption. Secondly, there are popular prominent party such as PDIP that will always be chosen because of this identity politics, and they can later on abuse their powers as because they think that they are very prominent and there's no way that they cannot be they will not be re-elected in the future. Thirdly, is that there is a strong needs of economic development such as poverty reductions and any other economic incentive towards the society, especially in times of COVID-19 and especially in times where crises like Papuan people exist. We think that I will make 2 points of preemption here before I jump to my argument. Number one, on the idea that might be brought by the opposition team about representations. I agree that under our side of the house, we will ban several political parties to actually engage in the election itself. But number one, we think that this is okay for in terms of the representation because Indonesia has a lot of parties with intersection of interest. You have multiple nationalist parties, you have multiple religious parties, and etc. that can ensure the representation to exist. Number two, politicians that are progressive and have no corruption cases, even if they are inside the party itself, they can just move to another party because they are likely to be many party will interested in them because they have high electability. Thirdly, in their side, we think that it is okay to trade this representation off because under their side, there will be a collective harm. They will likely to break their campaign process and they are not trustable anyway, even if they are chosen, right? And the second preemption in here is that don't make opening opposition sway you by saying that it is the individual fault, not the party fault. Because we think that the fact that a lot of corruption in status quo, the fact that this party has a lot of corruption rates, that means that they do corruption because they have the protection from the party itself, and the parties takes little to no action to put this politician outside the party or doing any action at all, but rather protecting them, right? And the second thing that I'm going to prove in here is why exactly is this is the only way for us to stop the corruption to end in Indonesia. Let's characterize how harmful corruption is. I'll bring 4 points. Number one, it is money that can be used for poverty allocation. Number two, it is money that could be used to build roads, vaccines, schools, hospitals, and etc. Thirdly, it is money that can be used as a social assistance for COVID-19 because these corruptions is literally harming people in times of crisis. Fourthly, it is a money that could be used for Papuan citizens to uplift their condition, right? We think that why is exactly this is the party fault, and why is exactly this is happening, right? We think that when big parties are in power, there is a vested interest inside that corruption, inside that corruptions itself. These big parties will likely, after they are in power, they will likely to re-strengthen the KPK itself and do restructurations, right? See how Jokowi attempt to restructurize KPK always comes after a corruption cases of important figure or elites in PDIP. E.g., for example, in 2015, after Budi Gunawan is investigated, which is a PDIP ally, he is suddenly there is a proposal to restructurize the KPK itself. In 2019, after Rizky Pratama, the son of Megawati, is investigated, Jokowi itself are proposing this restructuration. In 2021, after key PDIP figure Juliari Batubara is alleged of corruption, now we have this KPK restructuration thing, right? Now they do revisions of UU KPK 2019, which changes the status of KPK as civil servant. And now they are PNS, and now they have to take CPNS tests that are very, very problematic, because the majority of the questions are asked about political ideology, issues such as communism, religious radicalism, Papuan separatism, and etc. And thirdly, many of the employees who failed in this task is a high level investigator in the KPK itself, such as Novel Baswedan and in the cases of Novel Baswedan and Juliari Batubara, right? We think that this is a way for them to re-strengthen the KPK so that they can continue their corruptions cases, right? They are also forming a creation of a supervisory board for KPK, and KPK must receive permission to conduct forced research, says evidence. It will reduce the KPK power to do investigation. They even set a time limit, 2-year time limit for doing the investigation itself. This makes it very, very hard for KPK itself to investigate complex corruption cases that took a long time, right? We think that what does this prove you? It proves you that, number one, big prominent party will continuously abuse their power. They realize that they will be chosen no matter what. They can strengthen these corruptions, KPK itself, right? And secondly, they are undetectable. They can easily control the media, and no one even going to investigate them and show that they are having a corruption cases. Thirdly, they will be chosen anyway because they will use identity politics, religious narrative to sway the very root of society that has a low level of education and unable to choose rationally, right? The harms of this is less development, less COVID-19 crisis, and so many more. This is the only way to solve corruption because one, we take away all political power that can protect individual to do corruption. Second, it will become the standard of parties. Party competition will likely to exist to create organic check and balances between parties. And thirdly, by strengthening KPK, it can bring economic development. More transparent countries have more power to develop because it invites more investors and it makes more job openings. We think that it is only exists under outside of the house. We're very proud.
Thank you, Iksan, as the Prime Minister. To open the case of team opening opposition, I call Andi Fitria Idam to open the case.
Test, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, both sides agree that corruption is something that is bad. We understand that corruption is not something that we should normalize and so on and so forth. But we're going to take the bullet. We're not going to ban this individual. We're not going to ban this whole party and so on and so forth. We're going to let the society to decide which individual that they wanted to represent them in the end of the day. Because we understand that politics is the process of changing. Politics is something that, like, for example, when individual doing a corruption, it's not because like they are inherently bad, ladies and gentlemen. We should understand that they are doing corruption. That's because they have the chance to do so. That's because, like, they are given a chance to like doing corruption and so on and so forth. So in the end of the day, if you wanted to say like maybe some parties have lower rate of corruption and so on and so far, maybe they have lower rate of corruption not because they never do corruption or they are inherently good or they are perfectly good, but but they might not like doing corruption and so on and so far because didn't have that kind of particular power in the end of the in the current status quo. But when we, for example, decided to like letting this individual that already doing corrupt, like what Kaiksan say, that this individual could still move to another party and so on and so far, means that they also could doing the same thing, doing those kind of particular corruption in those kind of particular new party that they are going to in. And in the end of the day, those kind of particular parties could also like changing their game, and in the end of the day, and they could also like being a corruption party and so on and so far. And this kind of particular game of corruption will never stop in the end of the day. So few responses to the statement coming from the government side of the house. They said that they was talking about that corruption is not something that we could really like detect it in the media, but they say no, media is something that is profit oriented. The moment in your party is something that your party is a big party, like for example PDIP and so on and so far, the media will try to find a way in order to find like the bad news coming from your party and so on and so far. They will try to find the news of your corruption and then they will publish it to the media simply because they think that it's profitable for them in the end of the day. So we say their argumentation that when they talk about like this kind of particular corruption is not feasible for the society is untrue, ladies and gentlemen. They also say that they wanted to evaluate this kind of particular individual and so on and so far. They say that good individual will move to other party. They say that what is exactly your parameter of good and bad if your parameter is only the corruption? Because they say that politics is about a representation of individual representation of the society. Politics is about like how you could represent the society, how you could like benefit the society. This case is also happened when you, for example, see the case of Danny Pomanto. He already did corruption, he already proven corruption, but society still chose him anyway. Why is that so? Because society think that the changes that coming from him is something that is beneficial for the society, because society thinks that he is the best option for the society. So in the end of the day, this kind of particular individual will also be chosen anyway because he is needed, ladies and gentlemen. So 3 things that I'm going to prove in my speech. Firstly, corruption is something that is naturally inherent, or it is something that is unpreventable. Secondly, I will prove like corruption is not the only parameter of good and bad, but thirdly, I will prove like even if like for example we ban the party, they will have another mechanism too, like there will be still other mechanism for this kind of particular corruption to happen. And lastly, I will prove why then this kind of particular check and balances mechanism already exists in the status quo, and that is exactly the mechanism that we are going to strengthen under our side of the house. So first thing first, why is that? We say that corruption is something that's already naturally inherent inside of the politic arena. We said that it is something that is unpreventable because of like, here's the things, ladies and gentlemen. The moment when you for example as individual, you already have power inside of certain parliaments and so on and so forth, it giving you chances to do corruption for you, for example, to take the benefit. When you, for example, already representing the society, you already benefit the society, you will take like for example the benefit by doing this kind of particular corruption. That is exactly the nature of every of human being, ladies and gentlemen. That is exactly why inside of the country, like for example Indonesia and so on and so forth, corruption is not something that we could prevent in the end of the day. So we said that with or without the access of this kind of particular ban mechanism of the party, corruption will still exist. But even if, for example, on the worst case scenario, that they say that this kind of particular people will still do corruption and so on and so forth, we say that it is also less likely to happen because these kind of particular people, when they, for example, already do corrupt, they are proven corrupt, and then they already like get into jail, they are got taxes and so on and so forth, they already scared of like having the same thing again. They already like learn from their what they already have in the past and so on and so forth, because they already gained the deterrence effect coming from this kind of particular law enforcement that they have. Okay, but secondly, let's talk about that this kind of parameter of this kind of corruption is not the parameter of it's not a good parameter of politics. It's not the parameter of whether or not someone is good or bad in politics. Understand that when we're talking about politics, it's about when someone could represent the society, when someone like could benefit the society and so on and so forth. That's exactly like what I told you before. That is exactly why people like Danny Pomanto will still choose it, even if they are corrupt, because the society think that he is beneficial, he is something that he is someone that is needed for the society and so on and so forth. But even if, for example, we are talking about a really bad corruptor that already doing corruption over and over again, we see that these kind of particular people will less likely also to be chosen by the society, because understand the society also have their capacity of rationalization. When you already see like someone already get into jail for they are doing corruption and over again, society will already know that these individual are not those kind of individual that are fit and that could represent them fully. They already could understand that this kind of particular individual are just taking like just taking profit by get into parliament. That's exactly the mindset that will come into it, like the mindset of the society in the end of the day. So we say that the mechanism of check and balances will still exist under our side of the house. But lastly, let's talk about like even if, for example, we ban the party, they will still have another mechanism to get into election, like what OG has told you. Like when, for example, we ban the parties, this individual could move into another parties and they could still do like corruption in that kind of particular in that kind of particular parties. We say also that for they still could like using another method to do corruption again, ladies and gentlemen. But also notice that they are when we, for example, using this kind of particular representation to decide whether or not a party is a corrupt party or not, it means that we are going to generalize this individual. We are going to generalize all individual inside of those particular party, no matter when they are good or no matter when they are bad. When we're already like judging this party as bad, when we already like judging them as bad, it means that we already harm their right to being elected, which it is not in line with the stance of democracy itself. Because understand that democracy means that everyone have right to being chosen and everyone have right to being choose, right? So that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. To close the case from opening government, I call the Deputy Prime Minister, Dava Rizkila. Time is yours.
Starting in three. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The team that can win this debate is the team that is able to explain whether or not forbidding is justified and which of the House solves corruption cases. So far, opening opposition never bring in alternative, and she totally just keep on saying this is an inevitable or mechanism don't solve anything. If we manage to explain to you why this will effectively reform the parliament, it's already a benefit anyway in our side house, rather than like opening opposition who accept these corruptions and justifying it by saying it's inevitable. Before I go to my extension, I'm going to bring 2 engagements towards opening opposition third house. Firstly, Tony said that progressive politicians who move to other parties will still likely to do corruption. To respond to this, why this is not true. Firstly, we say that this is not true because these are the politicians that are willing to live and establish parties because they know that behind those doors that these political parties are so screwed up. The fact that they know these parties are big and can offer them strategy position, and they are willing to trade that off. This shows that these progressive politicians has a huge principle they really adhere to, right? But secondly, progressive politicians do not want to lose their progressive status and image because they don't want to lose and trade off their competitive edge in the politics side. Notice that the numbers of progressive politicians is still lesser than other segments of politicians. This shows to you that progressive politicians still wants to maintain their progressive status, so they have a competitive edge in comparison to other politicians. Second engagement, do not buy Tory's grievances about corrupted politicians being re-elected just like Dani Pupanto, because it's very irrelevant. If the grievances from opposition is that corrupted politicians will be voted in elections because apparently they still have high electability, we also do not want that. We're also going to prohibit politicians like Dani Pupanto to run for the office if it has been proven that these politicians has high corruption rates. Here's my extension. I'm going to extend why it's justified to bar these parties to function. And secondly, I'm going to explain why in outside the house we reform Indonesia's politics. Number one, why is it justified? We think that by forbidding these parties to function is justified because these parties accrue their dominant political foothold through like so many illegitimate tenors. They gain overwhelmingly huge amount of political power, not because they displayed a strong political performance and presented like the best form of policies out the society there is, but rather they managed to use their harmful tactics like corruption, capitalizing on the notion of like founding fathers that were the party's members, controlling media narratives and political discourses in society with their huge capital, gaslighting the corruption rumors. What does this lead to? This leads to an unequal level playing of fields and asymmetrical competition with the other political parties, which violates the essential aim of democracy, which is to give political access to everyone, regardless of their level of privilege. That's why, like, there's an asymmetrical competition between established purple in Indonesia. This is directly engaged with Tory's model, right? Also, when she said that she wants to allow these individuals to when they want to allow Indonesian societies to vote which political parties. If these political parties that have been corrupted but still has high eligibility in their side house, these political parties will still be elected. Will still be elected anyway, right? So we don't see why we don't see any solvency coming from opposition side of the house, especially when they still allow these politician parties to join the general election with an established power. That's why it's very important for us to directly like forbid these political parties to function from the get-go. Right? We think that it is justified for us to forbid these parties to function to restore the true ideal of democratic value that Indonesia aspired for. Right? We think that it is so urgent, considering how bad and critical the condition of Indonesia's corruption cases. Even KPK itself is being halted to function properly, and the process of joining KPK is that's screwed up. It's very important for us to reform the parliament as soon as possible. Secondly, a second extension, why in outside the house we solve Indonesia's democracy? By forbidding these political parties to function, it's going to prevent abuse of power in government, especially like corruption of state's budget, backdoor deals with corporation, arbitrary appointment of cronyism and dynasty to strategic position in the government. Also, this will also give messages to the other political parties to not ever corrupt again. This will make political parties to have a deterrence effect, to be more careful towards the case of corruption, because they know that they will be evaluated. They will be evaluated every 3 months, for example, and they will be required to be transparent with the state budget allocation. Right? We can see that in outside the house we might have less political parties, but we say that's okay because at least in outside the house, remaining parties and politicians that exist in the parliament is filled with transparent politicians, and there will be no more cases of corruption. Instead of like having state's budget be corrupt, we can actually be more wary of our state's budget and be mindful on its allocation. Instead of taxpayers' money being stolen, so the politicians can bribe corporations so they have huge donor and do money laundering, for example. Now in outside the house, the money can actually be assured to allocate more public infrastructure. We can now make sure people in Papua can access electricity and water and etc. And now we will have a better incentive of political parties to reform or improve the quality of public policies. But if also, second guide, even if in outside the house we trade off individuals that are being represented by these parties, one, they can still benefit from this policy because it's for their own sake. Because if we still allow these political parties to still participate in general election, there's a very high possibility that these individuals will be manipulated again by these political parties. Their tax monies will still be used for the politicians' own bad vested interests. So we're saving them. But secondly, it's not like we trade them off. Like San told you, we live in Indonesia's multi-party system where it's not hard to find a representation. There are lots of politicians that wants to consolidate with you, listen to your aspirations, and like create researches on what actually do you want right now. So in case of representation, it's not hard. But lastly, even if for the beginning it is backlashing with the principle of inclusivity and democracy, we say it's okay because the thing that we bar to function is the exact entities that have ruined Indonesia's democracy for God knows how many long. Democracy is not only about inclusivity, but it's about what's best for the country. Very proud to propose.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for the speech. To close the case from opening opposition, I call the DLO. Katharina, time is yours.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, within this debate, I would like to bring two arguments that will be related to this motion. So the first one is how this policy is actually harming the essence of democracy in the general election, and therefore it should not be applied. And the second argument is how this policy is actually the form of overgeneralization towards these parties with high rate of corruption cases. But before we jump into the explanations of my arguments, I would like to make some rebuttals first. They will be referring to the statement that came from the government side of the House. Okay, so the first statement, they said that they wanted to prohibit the ones who have proven commit the corruption. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we can see, if this is the mechanism that they wanted to do, if this is the mechanism that they wanted to do under the government side of the House, then we don't then we don't see it as bad, ladies and gentlemen. Then if you wanted to prohibit the ones who have proven commit the corruption, then just prohibit them individually. Then just prohibit them individually, but not by forbidding the whole parties with high rate of corruption cases to join the general election, because that would harm the essence of democracy that I will be elaborate later in my arguments. The next statement, they also stated that by forbidding, they said that by forbidding these parties with high rate of corruption cases to join the general election is justified because there's a possibility that these people who already committed the corruption itself will be elected again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if they're already committed the corruption itself and still elected by the people, well, then it means the people see these the people are actually fail to see the essence of the corruption itself, ladies and gentlemen. And so what we need to fix here is not only the access of these people to be elected again in the general election, but also the people's mindset, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. But also the mindset of the people itself, ladies and gentlemen, because if people actually still choose the ones who have already committed the corruption in the very first place, even though they already knew that these people are corruptive, then what's wrong is how these people see the corruption cases itself, ladies and gentlemen. And so we can't blame fully to these people who commit the corruption cases in the very first place. So by forbidding parties with high rate of corruption cases would not be relevant to join the general election, would not be relevant, and would not help us and the government side of the House to reach their goal in decreasing the corruption cases if the people still could not understand the corruption cases itself. And also lastly, they also stated that this policy will send a message to other parties that they will be evaluated and be required to be transparent because they're forbidding parties with high rate of corruption cases to join the general election. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think that by applying this policy, it will send this kind of message to other parties. It will actually send the message that what the politics that the politics is not seeing the parties as a whole, but only as individual. So no matter what kind of a contribution that they give as a party, it won't matter at all, only because an individual fault, ladies and gentlemen. And so we don't think, and so if this finally happen, we don't think that these big parties who have the members who with high rate of corruption cases would actually want to contribute more for the politic itself, ladies and gentlemen, that would actually harm the progressivity of the politic in our country. Now, moving on to the explanations of my arguments. So the first argument is how this policy is actually harming the essence of democracy in the general election, and therefore it should not be applied. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is actually the essence of general election itself? From the very first place, the general election is always referred as the democracy party, where every people in all parties have the same rights to be elected in the general election. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if the government side of the House choose to forbid parties with high rate of corruption cases to join the general election, then it would harm the actual essence of democracy itself. No, thank you. Where these parties should have had place in the election. And yes, we understand that what the government side of the House want is the fair election to happen, and that they wanted to minimize the possibility of the potential corruptors from these parties to be elected. But ladies and gentlemen, we believe that our citizens are knowledgeable enough to judge and choose which one is the best option that they need to take. And even if the citizens are actually not knowledgeable enough and still choose the ones and still choose the ones who already committed the corruption cases in the very first place again and again, then what's being problematic around here is not just the party, if that's what you assume from the government side of the House, but also your people, ladies and gentlemen. And so you need to also consider and so you also need to consider that factor, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the second argument is how this policy is actually the form of overgeneralization towards these parties with high rate of corruption cases, and why it's bad. Ladies and gentlemen, from the very first place, the corruption is an individual fault. So, as brought by my first speaker of this side of the House, so we can't judge and value a party only by what their members have done. We can't take one specific act in order to represent the whole party. By overgeneralizing the corruption that committed by a single or only several members of the party, it's just as same as we're labeling these parties as corruptive, harmful, and bad when only some people who commit so. Well, actually, perhaps the party itself has given so many contributions to our politics, and perhaps even more contributive than the other parties with low rate of corruption cases. And so we don't think that by overgeneralizing these parties as corruptive could actually finish the problem of corruption itself, which becoming the goal of the government side of the House. And so we proudly take a stance against this motion to forbid parties with high rate of corruption cases to join general election. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. To open the case from closing bench, I call the member of government to do the speech.
Check, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, the whole idea that the opposition side of the House tries to bring is something that is not it is something that's not going to be proven, and it's not going to be something that's going to stand until until the end of the debate. Why? Because the whole idea of they're trying to say that corruption does not do anything. It is not connected to which party you're in or etc. They try to claim that corruption is something that the individuals opt to do, ladies and gentlemen, and say that it is not connected within where parties they are, whether that parties do have high rate of corruption or whether those parties does not have high rate of corruption. Now, this is something that they are gravely mistaken with, because we believe that it is very impossible possible and very unlikely for only one person inside of the party itself to commit those kinds of actions, ladies and gentlemen. We are not talking about some thugs or thieves trying to steal 10,000, 20,000 rupees, ladies and gentlemen. It is very unlikely for us to actually think logically that only one person could actually come up with the idea of how they could take the money of the state funding itself, ladies and gentlemen. This is naturally the whole idea of what the opposition side of the house, opening opposition side of the house tries to bring is literally out of the debate itself because this is not within the context that the debate wanted, ladies and gentlemen. But moving on to the towards the next rebuttal, they say that the moment when we are trying to permit parties with high rate of corruption cases to join the general election, we'll try to actually harm the essence of democracy. We see that at the moment when you're not trying to do anything to actually frame these kinds of parties guilty for the high rate of corruption cases that they have committed itself, it is not only going to harm the essence of democracy, it is going to lead to a far worse thing at the end of the day, which is the fall of the governmental system inside of a country, inside of a nation itself, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because it has been proven that this party is not eligible to actually go forward towards the general election and get the chance to actually lead a nation, ladies and gentlemen. Because we believe that from the very first beginning, those people inside of these parties, whether they are guilty of the corruption cases or not, have already been deemed bad by the society as a whole, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that is not. This is something that's still going to be very destructive at the end of the debate if those kinds of arguments saying that harming the democracy when we are not forbidding these parties is actually going to be true. No, that's not going to be true, and that's not the case at all. Now, you should actually understand that how do people should actually indicate someone whether or not this person is going to up in towards these corruption cases. There are no such thing that people could actually take a lead on except the concept of or the idea of whether or not these parties have already created individuals that actually opt in towards corruption cases, ladies and gentlemen. I may tell you that we cannot identify who will do corruption and who will not. The only leads is to see the track record of the parties. If of the parties itself, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot necessarily follow the idea of opposition side of the house tries to say that at the end of the day, if we did forbid parties, then these individuals would actually try to jump to another parties and jump to the conclusion of they can do corruption inside of this parties itself. Exactly because this kind of idea, we believe that forbidding parties should actually be something that should be permitted in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because we're going to tell you this that the parties itself that the whole idea, that the whole regulation of why the debate stands today is that to forbid or actually to make example towards other parties that saying that you will have to be very careful in actually trying to pick an individual that will represent your party as a whole, ladies and gentlemen. Thus, we could create a party that could actually check their personals even more. They could actually check whether or not these persons have any tendency to do or to go through those kinds of situations to begin with, ladies and gentlemen, creating a better essence of democracy within our standings itself at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Now, moving on into my substantive, we believe that by forbidding parties with high rate of corruption cases to join general election will actually create a better trust issues by the society to us as a government, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because we believe that society are someone who could actually be controlled by somebody, who could actually be controlled by massive power, ladies and gentlemen. If you're not trying to do anything towards these parties with high rate of corruption cases, they will actually keep trying to steer away the society to keep actually take their decisions to vote for them, ladies and gentlemen. This is something which is that we think is very dangerous because we believe that yes, these parties can do such thing because why at the very beginning they have a lot of corruption cases to begin with because they have a lot of power, ladies and gentlemen. They have the ability to actually cover these kinds of cases to begin with. Exactly why we believe that their opportunity to join the general election should be abolished to begin with because we believe that at the end of the day, if we does not take this kind kinds of action, it will only create a lot of corruption cases at the future itself, because we believe that society can be controlled by the massive power held by these parties itself, ladies and gentlemen. Now, lastly, we're going to assume if we did forbid these parties to actually join the general election, then we could have a better trust issues, right? We can guarantee that that society would actually choose someone better, other than the idea of, if we're not trying to forbid these parties, they're going to be controlled by someone with massive power, with someone that could actually give them some sweet lies and etc. We believe that it is going to be far more better if we're going to create a better essence of democracy, and furthermore, we are going to create a better governmental system within the nation itself if we did this argument. So proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Government. To open the case from closing opposition, I call the Member of Opposition. Time is yours.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
All right. I would like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. We believe, as a good government, what you should do is to ensure every citizens have their rights to participate in the general election, chosen or to choose. And what government's doing here is exactly the opposite, ladies and gentlemen. And therefore, our stance is clear. We oppose your motion that stated that you will forbid parties with high rate of corruption cases to join general election, because we believe that just because some individuals doing it doesn't mean the whole party has also the same ideology. As a member of opposition, I would extend the explanation of the opening oppositions in 2 arguments. My first argument is why it is justified to let the parties with higher rate of corruption still join the election. And my second argument will be why banning is a waste and even very problematic. But before that, some rebuttals. First, the previous speaker stated that the moment you're not trying to do anything and do something towards the corruption, that's the moment when the democracy is not there. Well, this is government being very ignorant towards the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. They say in the status quo, there's nothing that we do to there's nothing that we do to prevent this corruption. While in the status quo, you've seen many acts of, for example, KPK and other organizations that have done to prevent corruption, right? So we believe that this is an ignorant act coming from the closing government. And also, they also stated that the problem is they cannot identify who did the corruption. Well, if that's your problem, just increase your ability to find the person, right? Just increase your increase maybe the funds. You should recruit more people to search for the root of the problem. The solution is not just to overgeneralizing and not allowing the whole parties to not enter the election.
Right.
No, thank you. And and this shows that government is only trying to find an easy way rather than the right way. And also, they also stated that what will happen to the other parties, they will check their individual even more. No, thank you. No, what we say that what will happen is maybe they will turn their back to the government because they are angry. Why would one person's fault should be impacted to one whole parties? And we think that that is what will happen under their side of the house. In our side of the house, there will be deterrence effect. In where the parties will check the individuals even more, and which I will explain later in my argument. And also, they also stated that this will lead to better trust from the citizens. We say that this is also wrong because same as before, you have to realize that big parties with maybe a big number of corruption do have a big supporters too. And what will happen is we think people will start to turn their back on government. People will be anti-government because they are mad why their favorite parties is not there. And it also will be intertwined with my argument. So moving on to my explanation of my arguments. First, why it is justified to let the parties with high rate of corruption to join the election. 2 reasons. A, corruption should not be overgeneralized. And B, we said the status quo is enough for giving them the deterrence effect. Moving to point A, corruption should not be overgeneralized. Why? First, because it is unfair. The previous speaker have said before that just imagine if you did nothing wrong, but your partner in the party did a corruption. You've done everything, you've contributed so much to the country, but they just couldn't let you participate in the election because of your one friend's fault. We say that this is a very unfair
coming from the government. And second reason why corruption should not be overgeneralized, because parties never promote their member to the corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, why would you want to ban the party when you know that there are no single party in the world who actively or passively promote their member to do a corruption? Of course. Why? Because if someone in the party do a corruption, then the impact would be on the party too, right? Of course, the party would be afraid if they lose their followers because one of the member did a corruption, and therefore it is less likely that the parties will promote their member to do a corruption, right? And therefore, if the corruption happens, of course, it is 100% the fault of the individual itself. We believe that just because individuals doing it doesn't mean the whole party also has the same ideology. And moving on to my second argument is why status quo. Moving on to the next point, B, why it is justified to let the parties with higher corruption join? Because we think that the status quo is enough to give them the deterrent effect. First, we will discuss about the deterrent effect for the individuals. So even if you do nothing, the deterrent effect will be there, and the target should also be the individuals, not the whole party, because the ones who did the corruption have why the deterrent effect is there, because the ones who did the corruption have lost their credibility, right? People won't trust him anymore. Even if he goes, for example, to another party, then no parties would want to accept them, because the parties also doesn't want to receive the negative impact of a corruptor being inside of their parties, right? And second, the deterrent effect for the partner parties. Ladies and gentlemen, the tendency to the corruption, the second point is deterrent effect for the other partner in that party. The tendency to do the corruption is low because they've lost the trust of the citizens and they want to gain it as soon as possible, right? They want to redeem their party's image in the society's eyes, and therefore the parties must check the individuals, right? Therefore, they will choose a very best person to wakili their party. And also third, the deterrent effect to the party itself. Of course, there will be deterrent effect to the party, because if there is people do corruption there, their followers will be decreased and they could lose the citizen trust. Okay, so moving on to my second argument, why banning parties with high corruption rate is a waste, and why that is even more problematic. Ladies and gentlemen, why is it a waste? Because we've told you before, even if you do nothing, the status quo is okay. It is fair, progressive, and we say that if you do this, then it will be harmful. It will be problematic. Why? Because parties that have a huge amount of corruption, they also have a huge amount of followers, right? Why certain parties have a high number of corruption? Because the member of the party is a lot, because the party is famous. Therefore, they should have also big supporter. They are supported by a lot of citizens. They have a high amount of loyal followers that, of course, will respond to that policy that you make. And what will the response be like? Of course, they will choose not to participate in the election because their favorite party is not allowed to participate. They will get mad. Or maybe in the worst case scenario, they will turn and become anti-government. Of course, this backclashes with the idea of general election, where one of the principles is to achieve full participation of the citizens, right? And therefore, so in our side, we think that status quo is okay, and it is progressive, and even if you do nothing, then the deterrent effect will be there. And also, we have already told you that it is still not justified. It is still justified to let the parties with higher rate of corruption, and therefore, we probably oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, member of opposition. To close the case from closing government, I call the whip. Government whip, time is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, opposing government keeps championing on the idea on how it's not justifiable to ban this political party with high rate of corruption just because they have the rights to be elected in the general election. But closing government will be the only team that is going to prove you that that why it is okay to intervene the rights when this right already impacts already gives so many bad effects to to the lives of many people. But first, let's move to the first clash first. Like, first clash is why by forbidding parties with high rate of corruption will create a clean politic. Closing government already told you that when we are forbidding this political party, then two things will happen. First, it will be as a deterrent effect to this political party to not do the same mistake in the future. But secondly, because the deterrent effect exists, it will create incentive for other members or other political parties to not do corruption, because you will get the same punishment if you do corruption, right? It creates fear for these politicians, because these politicians have the tendency they have the tendency to maintain their position in political arena. Why? Because they need the power, because they need the money to make a living, for example. Because they need the reputation by being a politician, etc., etc. It is something that is hard to be achieved, and it is something that politicians realize. Therefore, they will do everything in order to maintain the power that they have, the power, the reputation that they have built since day one, etc., etc. Then, what is the conclusion coming from closing government? Closing government already managed to prove that by forbidding these political parties with high rate of corruption will create a clean politic, because there will be incentive coming from political party and the members itself to not do corruption in the future. Then owning opposition told you that we do not have to forbid political parties with high rate of corruptions, because people are rational enough to not elect them, to not elect corruptors or political party with high rate of corruption. But to respond to this, first, no, because we think that people are not rational enough. Oftentimes, people can ignore their rationality when they are being forced by other people, when they are being forced by conditions, for example. For example, people can be bribed to choose a politician because this politician is using their power. They know that these people is living in poverty, therefore they pay them, and they make a promise for these people that you have to choose me, so you will not live under poverty anymore, etc., etc. This example proves you that oftentimes people can ignore their rationality. Therefore, the whole rationality argument coming from opening a position cannot be counted at the end of the day. But second response is that even if people are rational, lots of people are still not exposed to politic arena anyway. Why? Because first thing first, in developing country like Indonesia, there are still lack of interest in politics. Politics is not something that is talked a lot in daily lives. But secondly, because media is very biased to begin with. For example, TV1 can be very biased to Prabowo, or Metro TV can be very biased to Jokowi, etc., etc. The reason why these media are very biased is under two reasons. A, because they get paid to be biased. Politicians can pay a huge amount of money to this media to always support them, etc., or to always write a good news about them, etc., etc. But B, oftentimes people who work in media are also part of politics. For example, the owner of Metro TV, who is a part of a part of one of the biggest political parties in Indonesia. These two arguments prove to you that media are very, very biased. Therefore, even if people are rational, they are still not going to be exposed to the real condition of political arena. Then, what is the conclusion of this response to opening opposition? This proves that clean politics will not happen under opening opposition, because people are not going to be rational at the end of the day, because they are forced, because media is still biased, etc., etc. But also, opening opposition also argued that corruption happens because politicians have the chance to do so. One response to this argument, exactly because they have the chance, because politicians have the chance to do corruption, we have to prevent and close the punish all the chance to all these potential corruptors, right? By forbidding to join and by forbidding political parties with high rate of corruption to join in general election, it means that we are emphasizing on how bad corruption is. We show an action that we condemn corruption at the very first place. This will tell all political parties with high rate of corruptions, even with lower rate of corruption, to not do corruptions at the end of the day. This will create incentive to political parties to be more strict to their members, because they are afraid of being banned. Because when a political party is being banned from a general election, then it will be a very, very huge disadvantage to this political party. What kind of disadvantage? First is they will lose the credibility, they will lose their reputation, and in order for you to have this credibility, in order for you to have this reputation for your political party, it means that you need to do well in the general election, right? But secondly, this political party will lose supporters at the end of the day because they lose their credibility to begin with, right? Therefore, many supporters will be gone from supporting their political party. Then what this argument tell you? This argument tells you that the argument coming from opening opposition that tells you corruption happens because of the chance is invalid because we already give you response on how exactly why we should forbid political parties with high rate of corruption to be banned by general action. But then closing, let's engage with closing opposition. Closing opposition said that corruption cannot be generalized and status quo has been enough. But then one response to this argument, if yes, then closing opposition needs to explain on why developing country like Indonesia, where institutions like KPK exist, social movement to fight corruption exist, academics that actively give criticism towards corruption exist and often appear on TV shows, in media, etc., etc., then why Indonesia still have high rate of corruption? Because we think that this argument proves to you that Indonesia still has a high number of corruption. It means that even that the status quo that has been told by closing opposition is wrong at the end of the day. But then moving on to second question, why it is justifiable to forbid parties with high rate of corruption cases to join general election? Closing government already told you that the only ways to know whether these people will do corruption or not in the future is by seeing the track records of this political party, right? Forbidding is like a preventive measures to prevent corruptions in the future. Therefore, the proposal from CG can reduce the number of corruption in the future. But then opening opposition told you that parameter of good politics is not only based on corruption. This is untrue because corruption affects politic arena so much. Why so? Due to corruption, we cannot help people with poverty. We cannot give assistance to people in needs, etc., etc. It means that corruption gives a lot of impact to the country, right? What this argument tells you? This argument tells you that the idea coming from opening opposition that corruption cannot be eventually a parameter of good politics is invalid because corruption adds so much more dynamic in politic arena, right? But then closing opposition told you that it is the rights to choose or to be involved in general election for everyone. Yes, here is the response from CG. Yes, we concede that everyone has the rights, but when your rights has created bad impacts to many amount of people, then it is okay to intervene your rights. Because when you have a right, you also have a duty to protect your rights. Rights doesn't come for free, right? You have to do some requirements in order for you to be able to get that rights. Based on those reasons, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you for the speech. To close the whole case from the debate, I call the opposition whip. Time is yours.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The problem that are coming from the governments of the House that they are seeing into the lenses that politics are actually black and white. But we say on the oppositions of the House, we say that it is much more than that. What we want in this debate is we, as a closing government, we want to stick the status quo. Karen has already told you why by not letting this party, a candidate from a party that has a high corruption cases to join general election is not justified. And secondly, Karen has already told you onto how then it will also deterrence effect will also be exist on our side, which I will extend further into my clashes later. So before moving on towards my clashes, I would like to give several rebuttals towards the closing government side of the House. They are saying that this kind of it's going to bring harm when we allow these parties that has corruption cases to also participate in general election, because most likely, firstly, they do not have much followers to begin with because they have records and stuff like that, right? But and thus they will opt into an option that bribing the media, etc., etc., that media is biased, right? But we say that we live in a world where information spreads so fast. Then there will be another platform for a check and balance towards this media. If any media are giving you any misleading information, then at the end of the day there will be another person or another group of people that will actually criticize that media that's saying that it's a misleading information and stuff like that. So we say that their argument, their rebuttals regarding media is not to be counted in this debate. So moving on towards the clashes, right? So firstly, today's debate are divided into two clashes. Firstly, is it justified to not include these candidates in general elections? Secondly, which side are going to prove to you a more better deterrence effect onto the corruption cases in Indonesia? Firstly, we say that politics are not black and white. It's more of like gray area. And corruption is actually inevitable, as Karen has already told you that corruption is inevitable. Like there are so many reasons why a certain individual at the end of the day decided to corrupt. Is firstly it's because of their characters that they are easily to fall into lots of godaan and stuff like that, especially when you have a power, right? You are a man in power and you are faced with all of these offerings and stuff. It's based on the character of the candidate or the politics itself. Secondly, of course, corruption, just like they say, corruption is fabricated also by more than individual. But just because corruption is fabricated by more than one individual, that does not mean that everyone in the party is malicious. That does not mean that just because a certain group of people in that certain parties doing corruption, that doesn't mean any other candidates or any other politicians in those parties are doing are also doing the same thing, because again they have different characteristics, they have different values, no, they have different intrinsic values regarding corruption, right? And firstly, and also open government try to say that if if really the cost, if we are trying to ban this corruption cases by banning the parties that have high rate of corruption cases, and with the cost of potential individual or potential candidates, they say that potential individual can just change to other party. But we say that it is not that simple, because people or any political figure decided to join a certain party just because that certain party has a certain goal in their mind, that they have the same agenda to begin with. So we say that by switching up to another party just because you're a good candidate and stuff like that is not going to happen like that in overnight, right? It's much more complicated process, and maybe the other parties doesn't suit their agenda well, doesn't suit their vision or mission well, right? So we say it's not that good of a solution. So moving on, we say that it's also not justified because firstly, we are also trading off our ideology of democracy, right? We say that this ideology is so important because talking about Indonesia ideology is democracy, right? It is a sense of identity of Indonesians people. When you rob them, it's already, when you rob a certain group of people from joining the general election, it's already fundamentally wrong, it is already fundamentally flawed to begin with our ideologies. Then if government are displaying this kind of contradictive action towards their own ideology, then how can the people trust the government when they're doing such thing? Then at the end of the day, people are going to resign the government because they see this kind of patterns of contradictive things to begin with, right? So we say, so moving on towards the deterrence effect will also be exist on our side, right? Like we say, firstly, because there is already check and balance in the society, there are already law enforcement or any anti-corruption organizations such as KPK and stuff like that. And most importantly, we say that these candidates will not do the same mistake again. Why? Because firstly, when they are already being elected and being political figure because they have track records to begin with, then they will be carefully watched by the society or any other authoritative figures in the political world, like because they come from a background that has a track record of corruption cases. Therefore, when they are in authority, then they will be watched carefully. Therefore, they will not have any other incentive to begin with to any incentive to do corruption to begin with. So because of those reasons, we are so proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you for the debate. Wait for edu discussion. Jadi untuk pengumumannya siapa